"Happy birthday, Dad," said my daughter, carrying my suitcase to the door of the retirement home. Her husband smiled as if it were a gift, not a betrayal. But when I walked into the director's office, he stood up, shocked, his face pale with shock. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The suitcase sat by my front door like a coffin. I stared at it from the kitchen doorway, my coffee mug trembling in my hand. Brown leather, brass clasps, the one Ellen and I bought for our honeymoon 45 years ago. But I hadn't packed it. Hell, I hadn't even touched it since we stored it in the closet after her funeral. My bare feet felt cold against the hardwood as I approached it. The zipper was pulled tight, corners bulging with hastily stuffed clothes. A slip of paper jutted from the side pocket, my handwriting but shakier than usual. "Howard Lester, Silver Oaks Residential Care." "Meredith," I called toward the stairs, though I knew she wasn't here. The house echoed back my own voice, hollow and confused. Ellen's photograph watched me from the mantel, her silver frame catching morning light. In it, she wore that blue dress from my 65th birthday, the last one we celebrated together. She'd insisted on baking my favorite cherry pie, even though her hands were already too weak from the treatments. "You spoil me," I told her that day. "That's what wives do." She'd laughed, flour dusting her cheek. The memory hit like a punch to the chest. Ellen would never have allowed this, whatever this was. My phone rang, cutting through the silence. Meredith's name flashed on the screen. "Happy birthday, Dad." Her voice sparkled with artificial cheer. "We have a very special surprise planned for you today. Be ready at 2 sharp." "Meredith, there's a suitcase by my door. Did you just be ready, Dad?" The warmth drained from her voice like water from a broken cup. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than what needed to be." My throat tightened. "I was planning to bake your favorite cherry pie. Maybe you and Trevor could stay for dinner, like we used to when... We'll see about that. Just be ready." The line went dead. I held the phone against my ear long after the dial tone stopped, as if holding on might bring her back. Might bring back the daughter who used to steal raw pie dough from my mixing bowl. My hand shook as I pulled ingredients from the pantry. Flour, sugar, the jar of cherries Ellen had canned our last summer together. I needed normal. I needed the ritual of measuring and mixing, the comfort of tradition. But the flour scattered across the counter when I dropped the bag, sugar crunched underfoot. The cherries, Ellen's cherries, rolled red across the kitchen floor like tiny drops of blood. I caught my reflection in the window above the sink. 70 years old, silver hair uncombed, pajamas wrinkled from a restless night. When had I become this fragile stranger? When had my own daughter started speaking to me like I was already gone? The pie crust came together despite my trembling fingers. I rolled it thin, placed it carefully in Ellen's favorite pan, the ceramic one with tiny roses around the rim, the one Meredith always admired as a child. By 1:30, the pie sat cooling on the rack, filling the house with the scent of home. I set the dining table with our wedding china, 3 place settings arranged perfectly, white plates with golden edges, the ones we'd saved for special occasions, cloth napkins Ellen had embroidered herself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this surprise was something wonderful. A party, a celebration, a chance to feel like family again. Maybe the suitcase was for a weekend trip somewhere special. At exactly 2 I heard tires on gravel. Through the lace curtains, I watched Meredith's silver SUV pull into my driveway. She sat in the passenger seat, checking her phone. Trevor was driving, his profile sharp and focused. Neither of them looked toward the house where I stood waiting. The cherry pie cooled behind me, untouched. The suitcase waited by the door, packed with clothes I hadn't chosen, and something deep in my chest began to crack, like ice breaking on a spring river. I opened the door before they could knock, dish towels still clutched in my hands from the pie preparation. Dad. Meredith's hug felt rehearsed, her arms barely touching my shoulders before pulling away. She smelled of expensive perfume and impatience. Trevor's handshake was too firm, too brief. His eyes scanned past me toward the suitcase, calculating. "Ready to go, Howard?" Actually, the cherry pie just finished cooling. "Your mother's recipe, Meredith. Why don't you both come in? I've set the table with the good china and I could wrap you a slice for—" "There's no time, Dad." Meredith's voice had that edge again, sharp as broken glass. "We're already running late." Trevor was already lifting my suitcase, hefting it toward their car without asking permission. The casual violation of my space, my belongings, sent heat rushing to my face. "Late for what exactly?" I asked, but they were already walking toward the SUV. I took one last look at my house. The porch swing where Ellen and I used to watch sunsets. The garden she'd tended until her final summer. The door with its brass knocker, worn smooth by decades of visitors. Would I see it again tonight? Tomorrow? They positioned me in the back seat like a child. Trevor's music played too loud, some electronic beat that made conversation impossible. When I tried to adjust the volume, Meredith shot me a look through the rearview mirror. We passed Washington Park, where I taught Meredith to feed the ducks when she was 6. Her small hand had clutched mine as we scattered breadcrumbs across the pond's surface. "Remember when you used to beg me to bring you here every Sunday?" I leaned forward, desperate to bridge the growing distance between us. "Mm-hmm." She didn't look up from her phone. The route took us past Mel's Diner, where Ellen and I had shared coffee and pie every Sunday after church. Past the library where I'd volunteered reading to children. Past the hardware store where I'd worked after retiring from engineering, helping young homeowners with their projects. Each landmark felt like a goodbye. I hadn't chosen. "Where exactly are we going?" I finally asked, as we turned onto unfamiliar roads heading east. Trevor caught my eye in the mirror, his smile sharp and satisfied. "Somewhere you'll be much happier, Howard. Trust us." The word trust sat bitter in my mouth. When had my daughter and her husband started speaking about me rather than to me? When had I become Howard instead of Dad? Meredith was texting someone, her fingers flying across the screen. I caught fragments, finally doing it, and much better this way. The phone's blue light reflected off her face, making her features look cold and unfamiliar. 20 minutes later, Silver Oaks came into view. A sprawling modern facility with manicured lawns and a circular driveway. The architecture was all glass and steel, designed to look expensive rather than welcoming. A sign by the entrance read, "Silver Oaks Residential Care, where life begins again." My stomach dropped. "Are we visiting someone?" Meredith turned in her seat, that artificial brightness returning to her voice. "Happy birthday, Dad. This is your new home." The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. New home? The cherry pie I'd baked sat abandoned in my kitchen. The table I'd set with Ellen's china would remain empty. The suitcase I hadn't packed contained clothes for a life I hadn't chosen. Trevor parked under the covered entrance, already reaching for the keys. Through the windshield, I could see elderly residents in wheelchairs on the covered patio, staring blankly at the landscaping. "This is temporary, right?" My voice sounded small, desperate. "Just until—" "Let's just see how you settle in," Meredith said, avoiding my eyes. The car's engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of lawnmowers maintaining the facility's perfect appearance. Everything was so neat, so orderly, so final. I sat frozen in the back seat while they climbed out, their movements efficient and practiced. This wasn't a surprise. It was an execution, and I was the only one who didn't know it was coming. Trevor yanked my suitcase from the trunk with unnecessary force, the leather scraping against the car's edge. "I can help with that," I offered, but he waved me away. "We've got this handled, Howard." His tone was dismissive, like I was already less than capable. Meredith checked her watch for the third time in 2 minutes, her foot tapping against the asphalt. She wouldn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on the facility's automatic glass doors. "How long will I be staying here?" I asked, as we walked toward the entrance. "Let's just see how you settle in first," she replied. The same evasive answer as before. My house keys still hung on my keychain, solid and familiar in my pocket. If this was temporary, why did it feel so permanent? Why had they packed everything I owned into a single suitcase? "This is for your own good, Dad." Meredith's voice carried the rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced this speech. "You're not getting any younger, and frankly, we can't provide the level of care you need. But I bought you that house in Beaverton," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "I funded Trevor's coffee shop when no bank would touch it. I've never asked for anything in return except you forget where you put your keys." Meredith interrupted, cutting off my words like they were inconvenient noise. "Last month you couldn't remember where you parked at the grocery store. Those are warning signs, Dad." Trevor nodded enthusiastically, his salesman's smile sliding into place. "Here you'll have nurses available 24 hours a day. There's a gym, even yoga classes. Much better than sitting alone in that big empty house." That big empty house where I'd raised her, where Ellen and I had built 45 years of memories, where the cherry pie I'd baked this morning still sat cooling on the counter. As we approached the entrance, I caught fragments of their whispered conversation. They thought the ambient noise of the fountain in the distance would mask their words, but my hearing was still sharp. "Now we can finally sell his house," Trevor murmured to Meredith. "Put everything into the coffee shop expansion. The real estate agent thinks we can get at least $800,000, she whispered back. "Maybe more if we stage it right." The words hit me like ice water in my veins. $800,000, the house Ellen and I had scrimped and saved to buy, where we'd painted every room ourselves, where we'd planned to grow old together. They'd already talked to a real estate agent, already planned my life around their profit margins. I thought of all the times I'd helped them over the years, the down payment on their first apartment, the car loan, when Trevor's credit was too poor, the business investment that kept their coffee shop afloat during the pandemic. Had every hug, every birthday call, every family dinner been them calculating my net worth? My legs felt unsteady as we entered the lobby. Marble floors reflected fluorescent lighting. Generic artwork hung on sterile walls, mass-produced landscapes that meant nothing to no one. The air smelled of disinfectant and resignation. "Well, this is it." Meredith's voice was artificially bright as she gestured around the space. "Isn't it lovely?" An elderly man in a wheelchair sat near the window, staring at the parking lot. A woman with a walker moved slowly past, her children nowhere to be seen. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft whisper of air conditioning and distant television noise. "We'll visit soon," Meredith said, leaning in for another pre-functor hug. Her lips barely brushed my cheek, cold and quick. Trevor shook my hand one final time. "Take care of yourself, Howard." They were already walking away, their relief visible in the sudden relaxation of their shoulders, the quickening of their pace. They didn't look back, not once. Through the glass doors, I watched them climb into their SUV and drive away, probably already discussing how to spend my house money. I stood alone in the lobby, my suitcase at my feet, finally understanding the scope of what had happened. This wasn't about my safety or my health. This was about $800,000 and the inconvenience of an aging father who had outlived his usefulness. The automatic doors whispered shut behind me, sealing me into my new reality. Somewhere in the distance, a television played game shows to an empty room. A nurse walked past, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor, not bothering to acknowledge my presence. I was no longer Howard Lester, retired engineer, loving husband, generous father. I was a resident, a problem solved, a house sold. But as I stood there, something cold and calculating began to crystallize in my chest. They had underestimated me in fundamental ways. They knew about the house, but not about the investment portfolio Ellen and I had built. They knew about my age, but not about my connections. They knew about my loneliness, but not about my capacity for strategic thinking. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the reception desk, my footsteps echoing in the sterile space. If they wanted to play games with my life, they were about to learn that 70 years of experience had taught me a few things about winning. Mr. Lester, a woman's voice cut through my spiral of thoughts. I'm Jennifer, your care coordinator. She approached with the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered this speech hundreds of times. Soft scrubs, comfortable shoes, a badge photo that looked optimistic about working with elderly residents. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. Ready to see your new home? I followed her across the marble floor, my footsteps echoing in the sterile space. The suitcase handle felt foreign in my grip, packed by hands that weren't mine, filled with clothes chosen by someone who didn't know me. Jennifer chatted about mealtimes and activities, while I studied the institution's details with an engineer's eye. Beige walls designed to be calming, but achieving only blandness. Classical music played at low volume, probably selected by a committee to be inoffensive. The elevator whispered upward. Second floor, room 237. Here we are. Jennifer's enthusiasm bordered on manic as she opened the door with a keycard. Your own private space. The room was smaller than my walk-in closet at home. Twin bed with industrial white linens, dresser that looked like it belonged in a college dormitory, single window facing the parking lot where I could see Meredith's SUV had already disappeared into traffic. Dinner's at 5:00 p.m. sharp, Jennifer continued, pointing toward a schedule posted by the door. Activities room is down the hall if you want to socialize. Physical therapy starts Monday if your doctor recommends it. She left me alone with a cheerful promise to check on me later. The door clicked shut with institutional finality. Silence pressed against my eardrums. Outside, cars moved through the parking lot like blood cells through arteries, purposeful, going somewhere, living actual lives. I sat heavily on the bed, the mattress too soft, unfamiliar. The suitcase waited like evidence of my diminished circumstances. My hands shook as I pulled the zipper open. Inside, shirts I recognized but hadn't worn in years. Socks with holes Ellen would never have tolerated. Underwear that belonged in the rag pile. But missing Ellen's watch, the gold Rolex she'd given me for our 25th anniversary, engraved on the back. Forever yours, Egon. The family photo albums that documented Meredith's childhood, our trips to Europe, 45 years of marriage, gone. My engineering notebooks, leather-bound volumes containing decades of invention ideas, business plans, The foundation documents gone. I searched through every pocket, every fold of fabric. Nothing. She'd taken everything that mattered, everything that proved who I was, who I'd been. Left me with the detritus of an old man's wardrobe. These old things just clutter up your space, Dad. Meredith's voice echoed in my memory from her last helpful visit. She'd insisted on organizing my closet, going through my dresser drawers. I'd been grateful for the attention, pathetically pleased she wanted to spend time with me. The silver cufflinks Ellen bought me for our first Christmas together, gone after that visit. Ellen's jewelry box emptied during Meredith's spring cleaning session. She'd called it decluttering, said she was helping me simplify my life. She'd been erasing my life piece by piece, memory by memory. I stood at the window, watching the Oregon coast fade into evening darkness. Cars moved through the parking lot below, their headlights cutting through gathering dusk. Normal people heading home to normal lives, while I stood trapped in this sterile box. But Meredith had made one crucial miscalculation. She saw a lonely old man, vulnerable and dependent. She didn't see the engineer who'd built a medical device empire from nothing. She didn't know about the foundation Ellen and I had created, the connections I'd maintained, the resources she'd never dreamed existed. Somewhere in the distance I heard the soft ding of the elevator arriving, footsteps in the hallway, a staff member approaching the building entrance below. Time to remind everyone exactly who they were dealing with. I walked through Silver Oaks with purpose, now my stride confident, despite the institutional carpet designed to muffle sound. The hallways told a story my engineer's eye could read easily, cost-cutting measures everywhere, understaffed nursing stations, residents sitting alone in common areas, some staring blankly at muted television screens, showing game shows no one was watching. The administrative wing felt different immediately. Thicker carpet, actual artwork instead of mass, produced prints, furniture that suggested comfort rather than mere function. The secretary looked up from her computer as I approached her desk. "I need to speak with Mr. Fitzpatrick immediately. Is this about your accommodation?" "I can have Jennifer. It's about documentation irregularities. Tell him Howard Lester is here." She spoke softly into her phone, then looked up with surprise. "He'll see you right away, Mr. Lester." The office door opened before I reached it. Fitzpatrick stood behind his desk, coffee cup rattling against its saucer in his suddenly unsteady hand. His face had gone pale beneath his administrative tan. "You're Howard Lester, the founder of MedTech Innovations." "I am." I took the chair across from his desk without being invited. "And I want to see my complete admission file, every document." Fitzpatrick's hands trembled as he pulled a manila folder from his desk drawer. "Mr. Lester, I have to say, when the paperwork came in this morning, we had no idea. Show me." He spread the documents across his desk, like a dealer displaying cards, power of attorney authorization, medical evaluation forms, emergency contact information. I examined each page with the methodical precision that had built my company from nothing. The signature on the power of attorney was clearly forged. Meredith had practiced, but she'd missed the slight tremor I developed in my left hand after Ellen's death. The medical evaluation was completely fabricated. I'd never met the doctor whose name appeared at the bottom. Emergency contacts listed only Meredith, as if I had no other family, no friends, no professional connections. "Who submitted these documents?" I asked, my voice steady as a surgeon's scalpel. "Your daughter brought them this morning. Said you'd had some cognitive episodes that the family felt. This isn't my signature." I pointed to the power of attorney. "And I've never met this Dr. Morrison who supposedly evaluated my mental capacity." Fitzpatrick's face went from pale to gray. "Mr. Lester, If there are irregularities in the documentation, tell me about your admission protocols. What verification procedures do you follow? He launched into a nervous explanation of state requirements, legal oversight, liability concerns. Silver Oaks had been struggling financially, he admitted. Recent state inspections had been challenging. The facility needed to maintain its reputation, especially with influential families. And what happens when a facility admits someone based on forged documents? That would be a serious legal matter. His voice cracked slightly. Criminal fraud, false imprisonment. We could lose our license. I let that hang in the air while I studied his increasingly panicked expression. Outside his window, the Pacific Ocean stretched toward the horizon, waves crashing against rocks with timeless patience. I think we have a significant problem here, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Lester, please understand. We had no way of knowing. I'm sure you didn't. I stood slowly, leaving the forged documents scattered across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. I'll need some time to consider my options. Of course, whatever you need. We'll do everything possible to make this right. I walked toward his door, then paused with my hand on the handle. One more thing. How long has Silver Oaks been struggling financially? His silence told me everything I needed to know. The walk back to my room felt different now. Each step carried weight, purpose, the measured pace of someone who understood exactly where the levers of power were hidden. I observed the facility through new eyes, not as a victim dumped here against his will, but as someone who might soon be making decisions about its future. An elderly woman sat alone in the activities room, working a crossword puzzle with arthritic fingers. A man in a wheelchair stared out the window at the parking lot, waiting for visitors who might never come. The staff moved efficiently but without warmth, checking boxes on their charts rather than connecting with the people in their care. Back in room 237, I sat by the window as the Pacific Ocean darkened with approaching night. The waves crashed against the rocky coastline below, their rhythm as steady and relentless as time itself. Ellen used to love watching the ocean. It makes our problems seem smaller, she'd say, her hand warm in mine as we stood on the deck of our house. Our house, the one Meredith planned to sell for $800,000. Memory pulled me backward to Silicon Valley in 1979 when personal computers were still experimental toys, and medical technology meant stethoscopes and X-ray machines. Ellen and I had worked 18-hour days in a garage, developing the first portable heart monitors that could transmit data wirelessly to hospitals. MedTech innovation started with a borrowed desk and a vision of technology serving humanity. We're not just building a company, Ellen had told me the night before our IPO. We're building a legacy. When we have enough, Howard, we'll use it to help people who can't help themselves. The Lester Foundation emerged from that promise. Strategic investments in healthcare technology, funding for medical research, and eventually ownership stakes in senior care facilities across the Pacific Northwest. Ellen insisted we take active roles in oversight. She'd visited every facility personally, ensuring our money improved lives rather than just generating returns. Silver Oaks was one of our earliest investments, 15% ownership. Enough to influence policy, but not enough to control day-to-day operations. Ellen had believed in their mission statement about dignity and independence for seniors. She'd have been devastated to see what it had become. Meredith had no idea, none whatsoever. She thought I was just some old engineer living on Social Security and the equity in his house. She'd never shown interest in the foundation, never asked about my business relationships, never bothered to understand the infrastructure Ellen and I had built together. In her mind, I was already dead, just an inconvenient body that hadn't stopped breathing yet. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts I hadn't called in months. Marcus Henley, the Foundation's General Counsel. Sarah Chen, our investment manager. Dr. Rebecca Santos, who oversaw our healthcare initiatives. People who understood that the Foundation wasn't just money. It was power applied with precision and purpose. The ocean waves below seemed to pulse with Ellen's voice. Use what we built, Howard. Make it matter. I stood at the window as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere behind me, the institutional sounds of Silver Oaks continued. Dinner announcements, medication rounds, the quiet desperation of people waiting to die. But I wasn't one of them. Not anymore. Meredith had awakened something she didn't understand. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. This was about systemic change. About using the tools Ellen and I had built to transform not just my situation, but the situations of everyone who'd been forgotten, dismissed, or discarded by family members who saw dollar signs instead of human beings. I touched Marcus Henley's number on my phone screen. Time to remind the world that Howard Lester wasn't dead yet. The morning after my phone call to Marcus, I sat in Silver Oaks' dining room watching the sunrise paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and amber. Other residents shuffled past with their breakfast trays, most avoiding eye contact, still treating me like a fellow victim rather than what I'd become overnight. Marcus had worked through the night with our legal team. By 8:00 a.m., the 3 attorneys were already in Portland, armed with documentation that would unravel Meredith's carefully constructed fraud, piece by piece. Mr. Lester, Jennifer approached my table, her usual cheerful demeanor, replaced with nervous respect. Mr. Fitzpatrick would like to see you in his office. I found him pacing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, sweat beating on his forehead despite the morning coolness. When he saw me, he ended his call abruptly. That was our insurance company, he said without preamble. They're very concerned about our liability exposure. If someone was admitted based on forged documents, that someone has a name, I interrupted quietly, and that someone built the medical device company that revolutionized cardiac monitoring in the 1980s. I suggest you remember that. Fitzpatrick's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed heart. Of course, Mr. Lester, what I mean is, we want to cooperate fully with any investigation. Good. Because Detective Morrison from the Portland Police Fraud Division will be here at 10 a.m. She'll need access to all admission records, staff interviews, and security footage from April 20th. You've already contacted the police. I stood slowly, my reflection caught in the window behind his desk. I've contacted everyone who needs to know. The district attorney's office is opening a formal investigation into elder abuse and document fraud. The state licensing board wants to review Silver Oaks admission procedures, and my foundation's board of directors is very interested in how their investment has been managed. For the first time since this began, I felt the satisfaction of watching someone else's face drain of color. Fitzpatrick sank into his chair like a deflated balloon. What can we do to make this right? You can start by treating every resident here with the dignity they deserve, I said, and you can prepare to explain to investigators exactly how easily your facility was deceived by a woman with a forged power of attorney. I left him with that thought and walked back to my room. Through the window, I could see a police car pulling into the visitor parking area. Detective Morrison right on schedule. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Search warrant executed on M's house at 7 a.m. Found Ellen's jewelry, your engineering notebooks, family photos, everything documented as evidence. Another message followed immediately. Trevor's business bank records show payment to document forger. Paper trail complete. I set the phone aside and opened the window to breathe the salt air. Somewhere across town, Meredith was probably discovering that her careful planning had overlooked one crucial detail. She'd never bothered to learn who her father really was. The morning ocean breeze carried the sound of seagulls calling to each other above the waves. It reminded me of Ellen, who loved watching them dive for fish from our deck. She'd always said they were patient hunters, waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. Below in the parking lot, Detective Morrison was getting out of her car, briefcase in hand. Perfect timing, Ellen. Perfect timing. Detective Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp focus that came from years of untangling financial crimes. She set up her laptop in Silver Oak's conference room like a surgeon arranging instruments. Mr. Lester, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence your attorneys provided. This appears to be a systematic fraud, spanning several months. Fitzpatrick shifted uncomfortably in his chair beside me. Detective, I want to emphasize that Silver Oaks had no knowledge of any irregularities. Mr. Fitzpatrick, Morrison interrupted without looking up from her screen. Your facility's procedures are part of this investigation. Please answer only what I ask. She turned to me. Let's start with the timeline. When did you first notice personal items missing from your home? Ellen's watch disappeared in February during what Meredith called a decluttering session. The family photo albums vanished in March when she helped me organize the den. My engineering notebooks, 40 years of invention notes, were gone after her April visit. Morrison typed rapidly. Did you confront her about these items? I trusted her. She said I was getting forgetful, that she was protecting valuable things from being misplaced. The admission tasted bitter. I believed my own daughter when she said I needed help, and the forged power of attorney. Fitzpatrick produced the document with shaking hands. Morrison examined it under a magnifying glass, comparing it to my actual signature on my identification. The stroke patterns are wrong, she noted. Whoever forged this practiced, but they couldn't replicate the slight tremor in your dominant hand. When did that develop? After Ellen's death, stress-related, Meredith would have known if she'd paid attention. Morrison photographed the document from multiple angles. We found the original forge tool at your daughter's residence this morning, a practice pad with dozens of signature attempts. Also interesting, a receipt for the medical evaluation form from a company that produces fake documents for novelty purposes. Novelty purposes, fake diplomas, joke certificates, apparently also fraudulent medical reports for family members who want to declare relatives incompetent. The casual cruelty of it struck me like a physical blow. Meredith hadn't even used a sophisticated operation. She'd ordered my mental incompetence from a website like buying a gag gift. There's more. Morrison continued. Your son-in-law's business account shows a payment of $2,500 to someone named Derek Coulter, a known document forger with prior for elder fraud. He's already agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. Fitzpatrick made a strangled sound. $1,500 to destroy a man's life. Actually, Morrison said, consulting her notes, the payment was itemized as consultation services. Very professional. They even asked for a receipt. She showed me photographs from the search warrant execution. My dining room table covered with evidence bags. Ellen's jewelry laid out like pieces of a puzzle. My engineering notebooks, the leather covers worn smooth by decades of use. Family photos scattered across the kitchen counter, where Meredith had apparently been deciding which memories to erase. The interesting thing, Morrison continued, is how methodical this was. Your daughter created a paper trail, proving your alleged incompetence while simultaneously stealing evidence of your actual achievements. It's like she was trying to rewrite history. Through the conference room window, I could see Edna in her wheelchair reading a book in the courtyard. Lyle was setting up a chessboard nearby, though the chess club had been cancelled months ago due to budget constraints. Normal people living diminished lives because institutions prioritized profit over dignity. Detective Morrison, what happens next? Grand jury indictment, probably within 2 weeks. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. Your daughter and son-in-law are looking at substantial prison time if convicted. She closed her laptop with a definitive snap. Mr. Lester, in 20 years of investigating financial crimes, I've never seen such a complete paper trail. They documented their own criminal conspiracy. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room watching the Pacific Ocean through salt-stained windows. Somewhere in Portland, Meredith was probably consulting lawyers, learning that her father wasn't the helpless old man she'd thought she was erasing. My phone rang. Marcus Howard, you need to see the evening news. The evening news played on every television at Silver Oaks. Residents gathered in the common room, their dinner trays forgotten as the anchor delivered the story that would define my daughter's legacy. Portland police have arrested a local businesswoman and her husband on charges of elder abuse and fraud. Meredith Walsh and Trevor Walsh allegedly forged documents to have her 70-year-old father committed to a care facility against his will. Meredith's photograph filled the screen. A professional headshot shot from her coffee shop's website, all smiles and artificial warmth. The irony wasn't lost on me. The victim, Howard Lester, is the founder of MedTech Innovations and a prominent Portland philanthropist. Police say the suspects systematically stole personal belongings and planned to sell his house to fund their failing business. Edna wheeled her chair closer to mine. Mr. Lester, is that really your daughter? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Meredith. After 3 days of silence, she was finally calling. Dad, please, you have to call off the police. This is all a misunderstanding. I walked to a quiet corner before responding. A misunderstanding? You forged legal documents. You stole Ellen's jewelry. You had me declared mentally incompetent. We were trying to help you. The house is too big. You're all alone. Stop! My voice carried decades of accumulated authority. Just stop lying. I know about the $1,500 to Derek Coulter. I know about the practice signatures. I know about your plan to sell my house. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Dad, if this goes to trial, it'll destroy our business. Aiden's college fund. You should have thought about Aiden before you decided to erase your father. I ended the call. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Aiden this time. Grandpa, I just saw the news. I had no idea what Mom and Dad were planning. Hearing his voice, young, confused, ashamed, reminded me that innocent people get caught in the crossfire of other people's greed. I know you didn't, son. Is it true? Did they really steal Grandma Ellen's things? Yes. A long pause. Then I'm so sorry, Grandpa. If I'd known. This isn't your fault, Aiden. Your parents made their choices. What happens now? Through the window, I watched the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and gold. Ellen would have loved this view. She'd have forgiven Meredith instantly, found some way to excuse the inexcusable. But Ellen was gone, and I was tired of being everyone's victim. Now your parents face the consequences of their actions, and you decide what kind of man you want to become. The next morning, a news van was parked outside Silver Oaks. Trevor's coffee shop had a line of protesters holding signs reading, "Elder abuse is not business," and "Jail the thieves." Their Yelp reviews had plummeted overnight. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Meredith. I deleted them without listening. 2 days later, I walked into Silver Oak's conference room to find 5 board members standing respectfully around a polished mahogany table. The contrast with my last visit here was striking. Instead of being escorted like a confused patient, I entered as someone whose presence commanded attention. "Mr. Lester," Fitzpatrick began, his voice carrying none of its previous condescension, "we'd be deeply honored if you would consider joining our Patient Care Oversight Board." The other members nodded with the kind of deference usually reserved for major donors, which I supposed I was. "I accept," I said, settling into the chair they'd pulled out for me, "provided we prioritize resident dignity above profit margins." Board member Patricia Chen, a retired hospital administrator, leaned forward. "We've reviewed your preliminary recommendations: the chess club restoration, library renovation, art therapy program. What's the projected investment?" $300,000 for the first year. I opened the portfolio Marcus had prepared. "The Lester Foundation will cover all expenses. Dignity doesn't have a price tag." The room fell silent except for the scratch of pens taking notes. I'd learned long ago that specific numbers make abstract concepts concrete. Mr. Lester asked board member James Rivera, "What's your timeline for implementation?" "Chess club resumes next Tuesday. I've already contacted Lyle Brennan to coordinate. He's an excellent player who's been languishing without intellectual stimulation. Library renovation begins Monday with new large print books arriving Thursday. Art therapy starts the following week with students from Portland Community College." I slid photographs across the table. The empty activity room, outdated common areas, understaffed nursing stations. These aren't just budget items. They're people's lives. We toured the facility together, and I watched their expressions change as they saw Silver Oaks through resident eyes rather than administrator convenience. Edna showed us her small collection of books, apologizing for their worn condition. Lyle demonstrated chess moves on an improvised board made from cardboard and bottle caps. "This space could accommodate 20 chess tables," I told the group, gesturing toward the underutilized recreation room. "And this wall would be perfect for displaying resident artwork." Board member Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. The resident engagement would improve dramatically. Engagement, physical health, mental stimulation, family satisfaction, everything interconnected, I agreed. Quality care isn't expensive when you measure the right outcomes. Back in the conference room, I signed the board appointment documents while they watched with something approaching awe. The foundation commitment papers followed, making the funding legally binding. "One more thing," I said, capping my pen with deliberate ceremony. "I want monthly progress reviews with resident input, not surveys about satisfaction, but actual conversations about what they need to maintain dignity." Fitzpatrick practically vibrated with nervous energy. "Of course, Mr. Lester. Whatever you think best." Walking back to my room, I felt Ellen's presence in the hallways improved, lighting in the plans taking shape, in the hope beginning to replace resignation on residents' faces. She'd always believed that money without purpose was just paper. Purpose without resources was just wishful thinking. I had both now. My phone rang as I reached room 237. Marcus with news about the media strategy for Meredith's case. Time to ensure the legal victory translated into lasting change. By May, the story had grown beyond local news into a cautionary tale about elder abuse that resonated across the country. I watched the coverage from Silver Oak's common room, surrounded by residents who'd become unlikely celebrities in their own right. Local couple charged with defrauding elderly father appear in court today, the anchor announced over footage of Meredith and Trevor hurrying past reporters. Meredith and Trevor Walsh face multiple felony charges in what prosecutors call a systematic scheme to steal from Howard Lester, founder of MedTech Innovations. Lyle shook his head in disgust. How does someone do that to their own parent? The camera cut to an interview with the prosecutor. The defendants forged power of attorney documents, fabricated medical evaluations, and systematically stole family heirlooms over several months. This represents elder abuse at its most calculated. That evening, Aidan helped me navigate the social media storm engulfing his parents. Meredith's Instagram account, once full of carefully curated family photos, had become a wasteland of angry comments. "Look at this," Aidan said, scrolling through the responses to her last post. A picture of her and Trevor smiling at their coffee shop. Disgusting. How could anyone do this to their elderly father? The business review sites told an even starker story. Their coffee shops had dropped from 4-star ratings to 1.5 stars virtually overnight. Customer after customer explained why they could no longer support a business run by people who abused elderly family members. "We used to come here every morning, read one Yelp review. But knowing what these people did to their father makes the coffee taste bitter." Local news interviewed former customers outside their flagship location. "I can't give money to people who would forge documents to steal from their own dad," a middle-aged woman explained. "There has to be consequences for that kind of behavior." Trevor appeared on a local business program attempting damage control that only made things worse. When the interviewer asked about the forged medical evaluation, he stammered about misunderstandings and family dynamics. "But Mr. Walsh," the reporter pressed, "police found the payment to a known document forger in your business account. How do you explain that?" His deer and headlights expression said everything. Within hours, clips of his fumbling responses were viral on social media, accompanied by hashtags like "Elder Abuse is Real" and "Chaz Justice for Howard." Meredith attempted her own interview with a sympathetic local host, but the questions were sharper than she expected. "We were trying to ensure his safety and well-being," she insisted, her composed facade cracking slightly. "Then why forge legal documents? Why not involve your father in the decision? He doesn't always remember things clearly. Mr. Lester founded a medical technology company and runs a multi-million-dollar foundation. Hospital administrators across the region describe him as sharp and engaged. Are you suggesting they're all mistaken?" The interview ended with Meredith walking off camera. By June, their business was failing. Local news reported on layoffs at their coffee shops, unpaid rent, potential eviction. The community had spoken with their wallets, and the verdict was unanimous. My phone rang one evening. Aidan, now 18 and preparing for college. "Grandpa, I've been thinking about changing my major to non-profit management. I want to learn how to run a foundation properly." Through my window, the Pacific Ocean reflected the sunset in shades of gold and crimson. Ellen would have been proud of the boy Aidan was becoming despite his parents' choices. "That's excellent, son. The foundation will need leadership from someone who understands that true wealth lies in helping others." A year of transformation was almost complete. April 20th, 2025. Exactly 1 year later, I stood in my own kitchen again, the morning light streaming through windows that faced the garden Ellen and I had planted together. The cherry pie baking in the oven filled the house with the same sweet scent, as that terrible morning 12 months ago. But everything else had changed. My suitcase sat in the closet where it belonged. Ellen's jewelry box was back on our dresser, each piece carefully returned after serving as evidence. The family photo albums lined the living room shelves again, documenting happier times when I still believed in my daughter's love. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock. Not Meredith this time. She was serving an 18-month sentence for elder abuse and fraud. Instead, Aiden stood on my porch, now 19, and studying nonprofit management at Portland State University. Happy birthday, Grandpa. His embrace was warm, genuine, everything his parents had never been. We sat at my kitchen table, the one Ellen and I had chosen 40 years ago, while I explained the foundation documents he would inherit. Your great-grandmother, Ellen, believed wealth was a tool for dignity, I told him as he signed the succession papers. She used to say that money without purpose was just paper with numbers on it. I understand, Grandpa. I promise to honor what you and great-grandma built. Together we drove to Silver Oaks for what had become my weekly board meeting. The transformation was remarkable. Chess tables occupied the recreation room where 15 residents played with focused intensity. The new library hosted Edna reading stories to visiting children from Lincoln Elementary. Art therapy sessions filled the East Wing with laughter and creativity. "Mr. Lester," Lyle called from his chess match with a visiting grandson. "Come see the philosophy discussion group schedule. We're debating Aristotle next week." The bulletin board near the entrance displayed thank you letters from residents and families. Edna's note, written in her careful cursive, read, "You return dignity to forgotten people." A daughter whose mother now thrived here had written, "Mom is happy for the first time in 3 years." Fitzpatrick's quarterly report showed measurable success. A waiting list for admission recognition from the state as a model facility. Staff retention up to 60%. "The excellence rating puts us in the top 5% statewide," he told the board with obvious pride. "Excellence follows naturally when you treat people as human beings rather than inventory," I replied. Back in my kitchen, as sunset approached, I placed a single candle on the cherry pie. Not from loneliness this time, but celebration. The walls displayed artwork from Silver Oaks residents, watercolor seascapes, charcoal portraits, abstract pieces that spoke of minds still creating, still contributing. A photograph of the transformed facility sat next to Ellen's picture. In it, residents played chess, read books, painted canvases, engaged with visiting families. Their faces showed contentment, purpose, the dignity Ellen and I had always believed every person deserved. I lit the candle and spoke to the quiet kitchen. "Happy birthday, Howard. You chose justice over revenge, transformation over destruction." The phone rang. Aiden, calling from his dorm room. "Grandpa, I wanted to tell you about my foundation management class. We studied your Silver Oaks transformation as an example of strategic philanthropy creating systemic change." Through the window, the Pacific Ocean reflected the day's last light. Somewhere in the distance, seagulls called to each other above the waves. Patient hunters, Ellen used to say, who knew exactly when to strike. I picked up the phone, surrounded by evidence of a year that had transformed betrayal into purpose, loneliness into legacy, and victimhood into victory. "Tell me all about it, son. We have important work ahead of us. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.